The wife always found something for me to do if I hung around, and we got into a lot of fights, where this post-war emphasis on income and consumption over community shaped the early
Base. Man, my wife wouldn't let me. Every time I would sit and try to play the game, girlfriend opens, hey, honey, you mind doing this for me real quick? Get up, sit down, you get ready to play again, opens the door. Hey, do you mind doing one more thing? No, bitch, let me play the game. Yaps. It's in the name. So recently, you guys know that I lost my job at 31, and I was kind of like bummed out. Granted, I kind of had something already lined up, so I was gonna leave that job anyways. But I was hoping to do it on my terms, not theirs. But one of the things was like I wasn't working enough, and I, was doing more than enough. So to get told that I wasn't enough was frustrating, and just that when I saw this video, the thumbnail kind of resonated with me with it. So let's see what Damon has to say.
According to the Kellogg School of Management, the wage divide between baby boomers and young workers has grown 61% since 1979, the largest generational pay gap in U.S. history. And while they entered the workforce when a minimum wage job could cover rent, over 60% of today's workforce can't even afford the basic costs of living. Raising the question, how did the richest generation in history sell out the future for dead-end jobs? Unlike the survival-based job market, bound by social class and limited mobility that shaped nearly all of human history, the economy that emerged after World War II was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Fueled by unprecedented wartime production, the United States reached its lowest unemployment rate in history, driving wages up by over 60% and encouraging employers to offer pension plans, health insurance, and childcare, benefits once unimaginable for the average worker. And when combined with the GI Bill, which gave millions of returning veterans free college tuition, monthly stipends, and low-interest home loans, household income stabilized and the framework for the modern job market was cemented, where for the first time, long-term stability wasn't a privilege reserved for the societal elite, but an expectation built into the structure of employment itself.
This is going to sound kind of arrogant, but I want to know what this is like as a non-American. Like, if my Canadians that are watching this, Indians, Koreans, my Japanese amigos, like, even my Hispanic amigos down in Mexico or somewhere else, like, do you guys have the same kind of thing going on there? Same, but different?
This newfound economic prosperity leading to 76 million baby boomers being born in the United States between 1946 and 1964. 40% of the nation's population and 50 million more children than the baby booms of the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia combined, where due to their unprecedented size, the post-war economy was fundamentally built to serve the baby boomers, giving them the rare combination of generational scale, economic leverage, and institutional support to dominate both the labor market and national policy, an advantage that no other generation has yet to inherit. However, despite the perception that every baby boomer grew up in this golden age of capitalism and middle-class comfort, the reality is that this prosperity unfolded unevenly across the largest generation in American history, with one of the driving forces coming from the greatest generation's deepening fixation on work as the means to secure the material comforts they had been denied during the Great Depression, where in 1946, 87% of women and 71% of men at Kellogg's voted to keep the 30-hour work week. But by 1957, most departments had returned to the 8-hour shift, as many male workers felt embarrassed by shorter hours compared to men in other jobs, while others admitted they wanted the extra pay to buy a wider range of consumer goods and to keep up with their neighbors. Some even described friction at home, stating, the wife always found something for me to do if I hung around, and we got into a lot of fights, where this post-war emphasis on income and consumption over community shaped the early
Base. Man, my wife wouldn't let me. Every time I would sit and try to play the game, girlfriend opens, hey, honey, you mind doing this for me real quick? Get up, sit down, you get ready to play again, opens the door. Hey, do you mind doing one more thing? No, bitch, let me play the game.
Baby boomers, those born between 1946 and 1954, to reject their parents' devotion to work and material accumulation, fueling the rise of the countercultural hippie movement, a movement that would go on to weaken traditional labor solidarity, diminish public faith in unions, and accelerate the cultural retreat from organized worker resistance. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum were those whose greatest generation and silent generation parents embodied the Cold War era company man ideal, where discipline, duty, and loyalty were viewed as a form of service to a larger organization or cause, creating a mindset that a person should dedicate their entire career to a single company or government agency, often sacrificing personal beliefs for institutional stability. And with the Cold War casting a constant shadow of nuclear catastrophe, America's youth became desperate for the stability of a lifelong career, causing the perfect storm for a large percentage of early baby boomers to enter adulthood, extending their working hours to 50 or 60 hours a week in pursuit of corporate advancement, developing cost-cutting strategies that eroded opportunities for future generations, and entrenched a corporate culture whose consequences still define the labor market today. Lastly, while the GI Bill opened the door for millions of returning soldiers to achieve a middle-class lifestyle, Black veterans in the South routinely denied these opportunities through discriminatory lending, segregated universities, and local VA offices that refused to process their applications. In northern cities, redlining kept minority veterans out of the suburbs entirely, forcing them into overcrowded urban neighborhoods where property values stagnated. While in rural America, veterans faced limited access to higher education, quality jobs, and business loans compared to their urban peers, where of the 2.7 million Americans who served in the Vietnam War, 80% were early baby boomers from poor working-class families unable to afford college deferments. And unlike the World War II veterans who returned home to a nation with open arms, many Vietnam veterans returned to a hostile anti-war movement, high unemployment, and an economy already in decline.
When we were in Vietnam, we had an enemy over there. When we came home,
They were the enemy.
we felt as if we were betrayed by our government and betrayed by the media and betrayed by the population, by their country. So, you know, if you want to know who I thought my enemy was when I came home, I would say, you're my enemy.
Resulting in cultural
That sucks, dude. I feel bad for the soldiers of Vietnam because the reason they went over there for sure was wrong, right? Like what we were doing over in Nam, what the United States has done pretty much since then of just kind of like doing all these proxy wars and starting wars and just all of that. Like it's no good. But I feel for the people who are getting caught up in it, like that guy.
disillusionment and a sense of betrayal by traditional labor structures that fueled support for policies that promised upward mobility, but instead dismantled union power, accelerated corporate consolidation, and weakened the foundations of the job market. Or by the mid-1970s, the combined weight of the Vietnam War, the historic surge in inflation, and the 1973 oil embargo had created one of the most volatile decades in modern economic history, eroding labor market prosperity and deepening the divide within the baby boomer generation, and echoing the energy shocks of the 1970s that sent gas prices soaring, as today's Americans are spending over $2,500 a year on gas, or nearly double what it was just 5 years ago. I want to highlight how I've personally been offsetting some of these rising costs by using Upside. Upside is a free app which gives you cash back on daily essentials like gas, groceries, and dining out. I personally have been using it at my local Circle K, as I simply tap claim and pay with the same debit or credit card that I normally would, where the last time I filled up my car, I earned 13 cents per gallon for a total of $1.10 cash back. And with access to over 100,000 local gas stations, grocery stores, and restaurants, people can earn up to 3 times more cash back with Upside than with loyalty programs or credit card rewards. Something that I really appreciate is how simple its cashback model actually is, and that it's not just another complicated point structure, where ultimately I just think it's a really great way to help combat the growing cost of living. And as top Upside earners are making as much as $300 a month, to find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description, download Upside, and use code Damon Cassidy to get an extra 25 cents back for every gallon on your first tank of gas.
That's not bad.
Or scan the QR code here to claim this offer. Thank you, Upside, for sponsoring this video. While the economic struggles of the late 1960s and 70s impacted early baby boomers in very different ways, their actions would drastically reshape how Americans viewed traditional job structures, and nowhere was the shift more visible than in 1968, when the countercultural movement took its fight to the workplace in the form of the KMPX strike, where unlike most of American history, where the working class had fought unbelievably hard to advance worker rights and unite against the gritty elite, the 1968 KMPX strike was a fight for increased pay, better equipment, and opportunities to advance the living idea of a loving group of people. DJs didn't just form a picket line, hoisting signs with cartoon characters and psychedelic art. They turned the first night into a psychedelic street concert with the Grateful Dead, Blue Cheer, and Creedence Clearwater Revival performing outside the KMPX studio in downtown San Francisco, where for many Americans who had endured child labor, the Great Depression, and World War II, this marked a dramatic shift in how the nation viewed organized labor, with public opinion actually favoring the Metro media director who stated, "Wild and weird discussion of economics, philosophy, politics, broadcasting, This is supposed to be a labor negotiation, where alongside this cultural shift in what labor protests represented, a 1970 Time magazine article captured the growing instability within labor unions. The young workers are of the same generation as the students who have turned the universities into battlegrounds. Like college students, they are feisty, ebullient, and unwilling to put up with things as they are. As union members, they're an unsettling force, pushing labor leaders to heighten their demands for fear of being voted out of their own jobs. This year, rank-and-file members have rejected a record 1 out of 12 contracts negotiated by their embarrassed and harassed leaders. In San Francisco last month, the iron workers won a 30% increase in a one-year contract, a raise of $2.01 an hour, equivalent to $16.78 an hour today. Where even so, the younger leadership is not satisfied. I don't understand what they really want. What it would take to satisfy them, where this growing perception that unions had become unreasonable allowed political and corporate leaders to pin the economic decay of the 1970s on the working man's so-called extravagant wage demands, accelerating corporate union avoidance strategies and embedding the cultural acceptance for future policies that would ultimately strip organized labor of practically all of its influence. And while the hippie movement was challenging traditional labor structures and higher education, the company man mindset of the early baby boomers was also pursuing the relentless demands of personalized economic growth, where this era saw demand for workers so high that a 1966—
Dude, I'm sorry, I just now realized this. Do you realize how high of a level this businessman is to have his phone have the stock attachment? He's got extra attachment on his cell phone so he can rest up here and do business. Like, that's a high level cell phone right there. This is a high level businessman. Could be a high level to unlock the stock attachment for the cell phone.
Economic growth,
That's
where this
crazy.
era saw demand
That's
for workers
crazy.
so high that a 1966 Business Week report noted employers were resorting to gimmicks to lure sorely needed workers from other companies and other countries, with Ford and others even combing Appalachia and the Ozarks in search of coon and squirrel hunters, resulting in wages as a share of national income rising from 68.1% in 1965 to 72.4% in 1969, enabling college-educated early boomers to move quickly into high-paying corporate and financial roles, marking the beginning of the yuppie era, defined by the expansion of Wall Street's influence, the prioritization of short-term profits, and the adoption of shareholder value as the dominant corporate objective, where under boomer leadership, corporate raiding became a common strategy, involving the acquisition of companies for the purpose of selling assets, closing divisions deemed unprofitable, and implementing large-scale layoffs, practices that accelerated the deindustrialization of the United States as production shifted overseas and capital was redirected into financial markets, where this management culture also actively undermined organized labor, with one anti-union consultant writing in the Wall Street Journal that the current government and business climate present a unique opportunity for companies to develop and implement long-term plans for conducting business in a union-free environment. The critical test, he insisted, was whether management had the intellectual discipline and foresight to capitalize on this rare moment in our history. Other consultants promoted the morality of a union-free environment and complained that some U.S. employers mistakenly believe there is something wrong, or even worse, something immoral, about fighting to maintain a union-free status, or by the mid-1980s, the number of union avoidance firms had increased more than tenfold, with company mottos such as "We're a family" or "We have an open door policy" established strictly as anti-organizing strategies. But for those serving in Vietnam, these corporate shifts were already happening in real time, reshaping the job market before they ever set foot back on U.S. soil, or by the time they had returned, inflation had already slashed the GI Bill's purchasing power to barely half of what the World War II veterans had received, eroding its ability to cover tuition or living expenses, with only 47% ultimately achieving their education goals, and completion rates even lower among minority veterans and those struggling with PTSD, forcing many to become pushed into low-wage, dead-end jobs, as organized labor protests had already begun decreasing thanks to the hippie perception, while high-wage manufacturing jobs were being outsourced by their yuppie counterparts, where this growing economic displacement and cultural alienation fueled a resentment that became a defining feature of American politics, one that political strategists quickly learned to exploit, where Robert Bonatotti, a key figure in shaping labor outreach during Ronald Reagan's presidency, described the approach candidly. In attempting to influence blue-collar workers, it is possible to target politically appealing messages to that group by emphasizing jobs, job creation, and the direct benefits to workers of our efforts to revitalize the economy. Blue-collar workers seem to have been very susceptible to such messages and found them very appealing during the 1980 campaign. Some thought might also be given to staging events that emphasize job creation or economic growth. Unfortunately, many politically appealing messages that could be transmitted to blue-collar workers, like limiting auto and steel imports to preserve American jobs, don't make good policy sense. A second component of a blue-collar strategy must be continuing sensitivity to recognizing workers and unions, meeting with labor leaders, recognizing Labor Day, visiting with factory workers, mentioning working people in speeches. All of these devices send a subtle message to blue-collar workers that the president has them in mind as he governs the nation.
They remind us that where free unions and collective bargaining are forbidden, freedom is lost,
transforming working-class resentment into calls to return America to its former glory, despite policies that in practice accelerated the erosion of union power, job outsourcing, and the widening of income inequality, setting the stage for the next wave of young adults to come of age in an entirely different labor market, where the far larger and often overlooked second half of the baby boom, Generation Jones, born between 1955 and 1964, entered adulthood in an environment where job security was never guaranteed, instantaneously facing wage stagnation, rising inflation, and a deepening distrust of American institutions. Watergate shaped their earliest political awareness, where millions only knew the president as Tricky Dick.
Yo, that was way worse than what Elon did, and no one called freaking him a Nazi. You kidding me?
Well, the countercultural revolutionaries that they had once admired
I'm not even
seamlessly
gonna
integrated
react
into
that.
the
That was a straight
establishment
up
they had fought
salute.
against, stepping over the homeless
That
to buy
was
Rolexes.
insane.
Disillusioned with both government and the so-called revolutionaries who had abandoned their ideals, many prioritized personal career survival over any effort to restore the post-war labor ideals. And while the
Yo,
largest
homie's got
generation in
he's
history was
double-phoning? He's at the
already
akimbo
unbelievably
phones?
divided culturally and economically, the sweeping wave of neoliberal ideology, backed by
Damn.
corporate and political leaders, fundamentally laid the blueprint to ensure the economy would never again operate for the collective interest, as it became fundamentally in service to shareholder expansion. Where in just one lifetime, decades of this winner-takes-all mentality have left these same conversations on repeat for the last 50 years, passively burying our heads in the sand while the job market has been completely dismantled before our very eyes, ignoring the fact that in our one shot at life here on Earth, 38% of workers wouldn't wish their job on their worst enemy, a figure that jumps to 45% among U.S. workers. And nearly half of all employees, including 29% of executives, would not recommend their profession to their children or any young person they care about, where this disillusionment is reinforced by a culture that normalizes constant availability, where unlike European nations that have enacted policies limiting employer control over personal time, 55% of U.S. employees still check emails after 11 p.m., 59% work on holidays, and 49% avoid using PTO out of fear they might fall behind. And after dismantling any infrastructure for collective labor protections, these longer hours have done nothing to improve wages, which have risen by just 17.5%. While CEO stock-based compensation has soared by 1,460%,
Insane.
causing 62% of Americans to live paycheck to paycheck, 59% being unable to afford an unexpected $1,000 expense, and 40% being drastically behind on retirement savings, where the burden is especially crushing for millennials and Gen Z, who have entered a workforce competing for economic scraps, all while Gen Z is paying 31% more for housing, 46% more for health insurance, more than double for car insurance, and projected to spend roughly $145,000
like that?
in rent by the time they turn 30. With this life built around endless work and financial insecurity, has left 80% of American workers suffering from high levels of job-related stress.
Are we really, hold on, are we really not going to be talking about like this increase from 2015 to 2020, not even like 2018 to 2020? What is this jump in vehicle insurance? What in the world is that?
Stress, with 65% fearing retirement more than divorce, 53% more than poor health, and 61% more than death itself. Yet instead of confronting these realities, we continue wasting precious time arguing over who had it worse, drowning out any real chance for conversation with these same recycled claims of generational laziness, as that complacency convinces us that decline is just inevitable, forgetting that every right, every protection, and every shred of dignity in the workplace was won by people who had far less and faced far more, but chose to prioritize building prosperity for future generations. But in our surrender and lack of accountability, we're not only giving up on our own future, but stealing the prosperity our children and grandchildren should inherit.
Are we supposed
And
to
so what I
just
hope that
take
we can
up to the
begin to
streets, though?
recognize is that despite having 76 million individuals
What is
living
the
side by
individual
side with one
supposed to
another,
do?
each and every one of their perspectives and experiences were drastically different, showing the immeasurable importance of having detailed conversations, of having conversations with the sole intention of providing value, of having conversations that are well thought out, well researched, and well intentioned, that force the other person to actually listen and not just interject with their preconceived notions.
I want to see what the comments
It would have
to
been
say.
so easy for me, and the video probably would have done better if I would have just made some 5 to 7 minute video just explaining why the baby boomers just suck, and then just, there it is, I'm all done, I'm gonna reap the
I would have
rewards of my
appreciated
hard
that.
work. But the reality is that that's not necessarily true, and it's not fair to say something like that. Just like
It's
it's not
fair.
necessarily true, and it's not fair to say Gen Z's lazy,
Nah,
or
life's not
millennials are
fair.
lazy, or Gen X is lazy, or whatever it is that you want to perceive them to be. And the frustrating aspect of that being the dominant cultural conversation that we've had is that it doesn't progress anything. If someone comes up to me and says, hey, you're just some lazy kid. Now, am I going to say, kind sir, give me 30 minutes to explain the intricacies of my life and how the cultural perspectives changed my mindset and how this led me to doing this, but don't let me forget about the genetic inherited trauma from my parents and how I'm not going to do any of that. I'm going to match them with the frustration, with the energy that it is that they're giving me. And so then we walk away both being frustrated and angry, and nothing productive has happened. We're in a state where we don't have the luxury to have unproductive conversations. And so while you might be, while I might have charged you up and you're feeling angry or sad or resentful or depressed, or that, I'm just some crazy kid that doesn't know what I'm talking about, whatever it is that you're feeling, I'm not here to say what you should or what you shouldn't feel. But what I hope that you're taking away from this is the importance of accountability.
But for what? I don't understand how it's supposed to be the importance of accountability when it's just the individual. But I was talking to my father, who is a boomer. He told me he got fired. He got his first real job as a dishwasher, making $80 a week. He said that job he could afford his first apartment, which he had a rent of $90 a month. Oh my God. So basically, my father could pay his rent with just 1 week's worth of work in Washington, D.C. as a dishwasher. The average apartment in D.C. now is about $2K a month. That's what I pay. So to do what my father did, I would need to make $8K a month, which is near $96K a year. I'm the bad guy. How did this happen? Everything happened to me. This is like, to me, this is the realest shit. You forget taxes. You need to gross up about 20-25% for the payroll, federal, and state taxes. 96K is not even close. No, it's about 96K. If you need 2K a month, yeah, you need to be making about 96, depending on your lifestyle, of course. The relationship between employers and employees has been completely broken down. Employers want good people and people want good jobs, but there's no incentive to work anymore. If a place is going to pay me less than I'm worth, not contribute towards my future for promotions, pensions, good insurance, PTO, good work-life balance, to me, this is the one here, because I feel like most places you get a job, you get some type of pension, you get insurance, you get a certain level of PTO, but especially in the corporate 9-to-5 world, the work-life balance is what seems to be sacrificed, and to me, this is everything. I don't want to work for them, and employers have gummied themselves up in a bureaucracy by trying to make everything run as efficiently as possible. I disagree with this because there's too many cooks in the kitchen. And we all know this, if you work with like a small little shop of like 10 people, things get done much faster than if you're working with something that's like 100 people, right? It's different. Now there are dummy job postings to make quotas and comply with laws that actually are hiring for. We are simultaneously have no one who wants to work and no one who's hiring. Insane. Too long didn't read. Companies want slaves no matter the cost of humanity. That's true. When you would rather go to the Appalachia and try to poach the poorest of society instead of paying a living wage, something is seriously wrong. That is where I agree with. It's this mindset in the corporate world that is just parasitic. It's how can we get these margins the absolute highest. I grew up with boomer parents that both came from poor, struggling, broken households. I never remembered a time where my mom did not use a calculator at the grocery store, and dad worked a full-time job during the week and then worked extra work on the weekends, and mom worked on and off to make ends meet. Grew up in a rent of houses and trailer homes. Nothing much has changed from my point of view. Still using a calculator and still living paycheck to paycheck. Real. Same here. It turns out our parents spent more than they should have on things we don't know about. Like, probably the kids, you know? Especially, like, kids look back and have so much resentment to their parents. Sometimes. I've seen this with my friends, and I've even seen this with myself at times, which I resent. I do. But it's the truth, where you look back and you get frustrated at your parents, but you don't realize they're working their butts off to try to get you an extra toy or take you to a movie or maybe go out to dinner for the week, because when you have kids, instead of just one mouth to feed, because you're only thinking of yourself, you're not thinking about shit, and I have to pay for me, my wife, the kid, get there with gas. Like, yeah, there's a lot to manage. Don't call them boomers, call them destroyers. Not enough people bring up John Welch and how he transformed business practices in America to emphasize short-term profits and move American manufacturing jobs overseas. We need a documentary over Jack Welch and how he ruined America.